Evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's Let's All Talk webinar series. I am Sophie Solaria, your host for tonight, and we have a very interesting webinar for you. Thank you for joining us. Now, if you haven't joined us before, we are here every Wednesday night, and the aim of these sessions are to help people facing the very real struggle of fertility get some clear advice from our expert panel of people. We've been running for 28 weeks now. If you haven't joined us before, we've got a whole wealth of back catalogue that you can look at, a few of them on YouTube on Let's All Talk Fertility. But we're just so grateful that you've joined us all these weeks, and we're really enjoying ourselves on here, and we're hoping that we're helping as well. I'm Sophie Solaria, a fertility patient, a journalist, the creator of the fertility podcast, The Long Road to Baby, and I'm also an ambassador for Peanut app, who has partnered with us for these talks. Peanut's a social networking app which you can download for free. It introduces you to women who are facing similar things to you in the TTC world, so you can get guidance, help each other, support each other, and it's totally free to download. So when you do download the Fertility Show group where we all live, and we'd be grateful to have you. And it'll also do you a favour for another thing that we'll tell you about in a second. But first, we're brought to you in association with the Fertility Network, the national charity, and we're partnered with Fertility Fest, which was co-created by my excellent co-host Jessica Hepburn, who will be back with you next week. But most importantly, this series of Let's All Talk webinars is being brought to you completely free of charge by the Fertility Show. The Fertility Show isn't the essential event for your fertility journey, and we bring you a whole year of expertise and a wealth of information from these talks, which are completely free every week until the end of this month. And then we stop when we'll be turning our attention to sorting out our first ever virtual summit, which we launch across the 24th and the 27th of September. So if you haven't got your tickets yet, do get involved with that. We're going to be bringing you a host of exhibitors, clinicians, expertise from across the world of fertility, all at the click of a button, all from the comfort of your own home, all that you can watch back at your own leisure for a while afterwards as well. So we do recommend that you buy your ticket for that. And there is also a discount code there in the fertility in the Peanut app in our group as well. So if you log into Peanut and go to our group, you can find a code to get 30% off the ticket. But for now, let's start tonight's proceedings. This month, we're dedicating all of our conversations to adoption and surrogacy. And tonight, we welcome Karina Diamond, a mother of 4 via surrogacy. She's here to tell us more about her amazing story, and I think she's going to come into the room now. Karina, thank you so much for being here. If you are here, this is the time that I can get concerned that this isn't going to work, and I'm going to have to talk about surrogacy for the rest of the night on my own.
I am here. Hold on a second.
Are you? Yeah. There you are.
Get the camera off.
I was going to start making stuff up then. Right. Is it Diamond, your surname? I should have checked this before.
It's
Dimon. Thank you. It's good to know. I should have.
To be fair, I mean, I used to be Patel, which was really easy before I got married, and then when I got married, my Dimon's my partner's name, and I used to say it's a bit like, you know, that the program Keeping Up Appearances when it's spelled bucket, but he says it bouquet. I'm like, well, it says diamond, but you want to say Dimon.
It's Dimon. It's so much, it's so much more, exotic when you say it like that. Well, I'm glad we asked this on camera and not off camera instead of talking about other stuff off camera. Sorry for not checking that. So thank you for joining us. For those of you watching, here's how our webinar is going to work tonight. Okay, so I'm going to ask Karina 5 questions of my own in the first part, and then we're going to give you, the audience, the chance to ask her any questions you have as well. So please put your questions in the Q&A function at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on what kind of device you're watching on. And we're not going to go live to any of our attendees, but we will get through or try to get through as many questions as we can until 9 o'clock, if Karina's happy to answer those.
Yep.
So let's get started with my question 1, Karina, and that is an easy one my end. It will take a bit longer for you. Just please, would you tell us your story up to this point, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I will do this really briefly because my story could go on for hours. But you know, you can get a lot more detail of my story in loads of other places. But basically, my sort of introduction to the world of sort of fertility, infertility came off the back of a cancer diagnosis. So I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2013, and I was 33 years old at the time. My husband and I had been married a couple of years. The children were very much on the horizon, but we hadn't had any. And I found out quite early into my sort of treatment plan that my fertility could be affected through my oncology treatment. And very, very early on, I had a conversation with my oncologist about being a mum in the future if I were to survive my cancer diagnosis, and you know what our options were. And you know, I had two options. One option was to technically put my ovaries to sleep whilst I was in chemotherapy and hope that when I came out of it, they would come back with some sort of function and therefore ability to naturally conceive, or to undergo IVF before, sort of urgent IVF it's tagged as, before
to freeze your eggs or your embryos.
What embryos we went for because we were married, to freeze my embryos before chemotherapy started. My oncologist very much wanted me to do the put your ovaries to sleep because it was less risky from a cancer perspective. My cancer was very sensitive to hormones. It actually was hormonally sensitive. So going through a process of ovarian stimulation isn't ideal because of all the hormones you pump into yourself. So we had to make a very calculated decision on, do we take that risk and go through the harvesting process, or do we hedge our bets and hope that things work, you know, on the other side of cancer? And I wasn't willing to take that risk, so chose to preserve my fertility via IVF. One of the hardest things I've done, creating life whilst knowing my own life was so doubtful. But we got through it, and you know, IVF and cancer are just massive, and you know, that's a whole other conversation to be had. But we harvested embryos there in 2013. I then went on to have my cancer treatment, and found that actually after my active treatment, the chances of getting pregnant were pretty low, for a number of reasons. I was put into a medical menopause to sort of keep the cancer away, and to actually ever get pregnant, I would have to break my 10-year medication plan. And every time we went to the statistics of what that would mean in terms of a cancer recurrence, the risk was just too high to ever break medication early on in my 10-year of treatment. And then I would be sort of, if I waited for 10 years, I would have been 43, 44, and it would have been a whole different ball game.
Yeah.
So I started to look into surrogacy quite early on. So my active treatment ended in 2014, and I would say sort of by the end of 2014, 2015, I was really looking into surrogacy as a route to motherhood, because I couldn't see any other way of doing this, and I really wanted to be a mum to the embryos I had harvested in 2013. So I looked into it. You can see I'm an Indian girl. It's really uncommon for my community to go through surrogacy. Very uncommon for us to speak about it. And it was a lot of sort of, I had to do a lot of that work myself. My husband, he wanted a family, but he couldn't get his head around surrogacy. And initially he was just like, that's just too far, like too far out of, you know, my comfort zone to even contemplate doing it. So I sort of put a lot of legwork in. Then in 2016, my husband and I took a holiday. It was the end of all of my cancer treatment. I had got through sort of really aggressive reconstructive surgery, and it was sort of the beginning of a new chapter, you know, and hopefully sort of putting cancer behind us and looking to build our family. And on that holiday, within a day of landing, we went to Vancouver. I started to feel very unwell, slowly struggling to breathe. I was having to cough to get any sort of air in my lungs, almost sort of vomiting because I was coughing so aggressively. And then after a sort of a couple of days of really severe illness, I wound up in A&E. In A&E, you know, I was popped into a cubicle. I was assessed by many medical teams. And as they assessed me, my condition got worse. I started losing consciousness. I was unable to breathe on my own. My sort of every machine I was rigged up to was sort of flagging red. And, you know, I was in a really bad way. And the hospital sort of turned to my husband and just said, look, we don't know what's wrong with her. We can't diagnose her. Therefore, we can't treat her. And as things stand, you know, you have to be ready to say your goodbyes because we don't think she's going to make it. And then he was told that he should call anyone from the UK over who needed to see me before I potentially sort of stopped living. So my sister jumped on a plane immediately and came out to Vancouver. And I was very aware of the conversations about how close to my own mortality I was, and that was obviously a very, very difficult time for us as a couple. And the end of that sort of incident in Vancouver was that I was eventually diagnosed with acute heart failure. It was something that was secondary to the chemotherapy I was given in 2013. So the drugs I had given had damaged my heart, and we hadn't realized that it was causing such damage until my heart basically fell apart. And I was admitted to cardiac intensive care with a 6% heart function and real uncertainty as to where our future lay. Fortunately, I did beat the odds. I don't know how we did it.
Well, I thank goodness this story has ended with you talking to me, because otherwise I'd be like, what happened next? You know? Honestly, Karina, this story, you're just amazing.
So, I made it through, and eventually we had to stay in Vancouver for 8 weeks before I was allowed to fly home to England. I flew home with a heart function of just 11%, and I was, in a wheelchair, very, very fragile, but got home to the UK. And over the next year, worked really hard with a cardiologist and a rehab team and lots of very, very specialist people to get back on my feet and, walk and run and do all the normal things that people can do without sort of giving a second thought to. And obviously then the conversation about family came back up again, and for me, it was still very much something I wanted to do. Like I did sort of believe that I wasn't going to die. Like if once I got through the first 24 hours, I knew I was going to stick around. So family meant everything to me. And it more so surrogacy, because now from a heart perspective, I didn't have a functioning heart to get pregnant with. So both my cardiology team and my oncology team were telling me that it was impossible for me to be a mum conventionally, and I should look to alternate routes. They really more than anything push adoption, because they're so uninformed about surrogacy. But I'd been doing my research on surrogacy, and actually in 2016 I'd been chatting. We'd talk about this more, but I had joined some private Facebook groups and actually got chatting to someone on there. We ended up getting on really well. We matched, so we
Wow.
came together officially to try and make a baby. In 2017 we thawed out some of my embryos from 2013. We popped one into her, and in 2018 that resulted in my beautiful baby girl Amala, who is now 3 years old, and a total miracle. We had at the point of sort of when our embryos came out the freezer, we had 12 embryos. They reduced to 4 to 5 viable embryos on the day of transfer, and we were meant to have 4 refrozen for a second run, and one was transferred into my surrogate. But for whatever reason, a miscommunication or something went wrong with the clinic, and they didn't refreeze our embryos. So I was then left with no embryos and no ability to harvest eggs again from a medical perspective. So it took a lot of work and a lot of counselling to come to terms with the fact that had happened, and that I needed to look to alternate routes to be a mum again. And then we set on egg donation, and again, I emphasize, as someone in the South Asian community, that is just not done. But we wanted parenthood, and it didn't matter to me how we found that parenthood. So we looked at egg donation. Initially, I looked in the UK and wondered if I could get a donor over here, but you can ask any person of colour. A coloured donor is really difficult to find. And then I also, the more I researched donation, that I found that you could sort of have known egg donors, and there were different forms rather than just having sort of an anonymous donor. You could do something a bit further. And I really found that quite comforting, because I knew I wouldn't share genetics, obviously, but a normal person would potentially carry this pregnancy, so still have a link to that child. But knowing that the genetics weren't there and the pregnancy wasn't there, meeting the donor became really, really important to me. So
really, that I've not ever heard this.
Yeah, it really did come. It just meant so much to me.
Physically meeting them.
Yeah. So what we did was we went via an agency. So we went. Our treatment was done in Cyprus. We worked with an agency who were from South Africa, and they had donors of color there. So eventually, I found a donor that I really liked, but based on a bio and a profile and an adult picture of her, and she was very similar to me in appearance. And the agency said, look, you can meet your donor if you're coming out to Cyprus for treatment. You can meet her and have a little chat with her. And I thought, God, this is wonderful, because there's so much I can't give my children or child that's going to result from this process. But if I in the future can just say I met the woman who gave me her eggs to make you, like I took so much from that. I loved that.
Wow.
So I met her with my husband and my daughter. It was a whole family affair, and we just told her about my story, and we told her what she was doing for us. And actually the 10 minutes turned into a good few hours, and it rolled on to the next day, and we actually got on so well. And it just seemed, you know, for some people that's not right, but for us that was absolutely the right thing to do. And you know, we harvested her eggs and created embryos with my husband's sperm, and kind of parted company. And the plan was for my original surrogate to carry our sibling journey, but just off the back of our embryo creation, she had a change in circumstance, and she couldn't carry for us, which was a big blow, because we had to go out and find another surrogate then. But you know,
story.
We did eventually find another surrogate, you know, from the wonderful community that's out there and that I'm, you know, actively a part of. And I met another lady, and she was incredible, and we got on very well very quickly, and we matched. We started talking in October of 2019. We were matched by January 2020, and we were planning on I was planning on a transfer for April 2020. And one day she just said, look, do you mind if we try and go like next month, because I don't want to be pregnant over Christmas? And I was like, oh yeah, sure, that's fine. Like, thank God we did, because we flew out in the middle of February 2020.
And then we all know what happened next.
Yeah, carried out our embryo transfer, came home, and then sort of borders closed internationally. So, you know, we were like, God, if we didn't go in February, we wouldn't be going anywhere right now. Found out after we got back that we were pregnant, and incredible, you know, really strong pregnancy tests. And we were like, God, those lines are really dark. Are we having twins? And my surrogate...
You had to put two in, right?
We had to put two in. So we thought that potentially both had taken, and that we were having non-identical twins. And then we had an early scan at 5 or 6 weeks, and my surrogate rang me, and she was like, are you sitting down? And I thought, God, she's going to tell me there's something wrong. She's going to tell me we've lost a pregnancy. Like, what is going on? And she just said, you're having triplets. And I was like, whoa, oh my God.
It's just the most. Can I just say, when I discovered you and I found you on Instagram and I was reading up on your story, can I say from that moment onwards, there are very few days where I don't think about you and about what on earth you are doing with 4 under 3, how you're coping, how crazy that must be, how wonderful it is that you managed to, this story, like for me, is just so inspiring. And I'm sure everyone watching is just like, this woman is just incredible, that you've just beaten every odd, like all the diversity, my adversity. And I only said that because my producer Laura's just come in with, they need to make a film about this woman, like they need to make a movie. Yes, all the adversity and the diversity, which is very, 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 very inspiring.
Thank you.
Very inspiring. So, okay, next question, to break it all down a little bit, because of course I would love to talk to you about all of this, meeting your donor, you know, as you say, cancer and fertility, which is another huge area that we need to cover. Actually, if Laura's listening, we do need to cover that as well. But this is about surrogacy, and so we really need to know how difficult it is, or not difficult it is, to navigate surrogacy in the UK, and the step-by-step process of that, because people watching are probably watching because they're thinking, I might do this in the future. So what are our options if we're looking for a surrogate?
I mean, there are a number of options, and I have to say, like, I'm obviously well versed in the route I took, and if someone's looking for another one, there will be other organizations that can help them, but I personally undertook what is known as independent UK surrogacy, which means I found my surrogate independently. She was from the UK, and we worked within the framework of UK surrogacy. So for me, that means that you didn't go via an agency. I went independently, and it sounds really crazy, but there are some private sort of secret Facebook groups on Facebook, on social media, and you join them as someone looking to have a baby through surrogacy, or obviously a surrogate can join as someone looking to be a surrogate. And it's just like a chat room, you know, for you to get to know people who are in this space, and, you know, and for surrogates to get to know you, and you to get to know surrogates, and build some sort of a relationship up. And it's very much a, you have to put the hard work in. So, you know, no one's going to find that match for you. That's what you've got to do for yourself, and you've got to be active in that community. And so, you know, for example, my husband, early on, when I was sort of really engrossed in the pages, he was like, you're always on your phone, you're constantly on your phone. And it used to really irritate him. And I was like, well, I'm doing this because I really want to be part of this community, and I want to find a surrogate who knows me, and they can't get to know me if I just pop on once every week. Like, I'm invested in this, like heart, body and soul is invested in this. And I had tried with some of the UK agencies, well, one of them, and I had written it off because the vibe just wasn't my vibe. It, you know, for some it works, for some it doesn't. But I knew I didn't want to go through that, one agency route. Other agencies were too expensive, so the price point like priced me out, as, you know, I couldn't join them. So, you know, I think you could join a number. There are a number of agencies in the UK, and, you know, your fees could range from £1,000 to £15,000, like. And for me, you know, either it was like the cheaper one was almost closing its books to intended parents because they didn't have the right ratio. So a lot of agencies will work on ratios. So they'll say, if you've got one surrogate, we'll only have sort of 3 or 4 couples looking to have a baby to that one surrogate in terms of ratio. So they won't allow too many intended parents onto their books because it gets oversaturated. And other agencies are too expensive. And you know, we found myself in this place of like, I don't want to be ratioed out, and I don't want to be priced out. I want to do it for myself. And so I joined Facebook, and it worked really well for me, because you might guess I'm really chatty and like quite an open book. So
what's the reason that somebody wants to do this? I mean, and as it goes, just full disclosure, I've always thought how amazing it would be to be a surrogate, actually. And I get why I would want to do it, but why would random women want to do it and then go on a Facebook page to actively try and find people to do it?
Obviously, I can't speak on behalf of.
No.
Tell you
what was your vibe while you were in there?
Genuinely, they want to help people. Like, you know, they genuinely have 99%, I would say, have families of their own. They realize how important family is, and they want to give it. You know, they want to give that to someone who can't have it. Like, I know my surrogates have both sort of heard my story and been like, geez, if anyone deserves to be a mum, like, I want to help you. Like, I want to help you. And, you know, I genuinely think that, like I say it quite a lot on my Instagram, that surrogacy for me is the ultimate act of women empowering women. And, you know, it's just giving another woman something that she can't do but absolutely deserves to have. And, you know, I think humility is a massive part of it. And, you know, like anyone I meet in the surrogacy community, I have so much respect for them, because they're so in touch with their own heart, you know, and they know what it is to be a good person. We need more.
Yeah, absolutely. And is it regulated on Facebook, or is it just really a bit of is there any kind of regulation?
You'll have admin on a group, and those admins are generally sort of the groups that I've been a part of. You know, the admins are very well versed in surrogacy. They're well known in the surrogacy community, and they will have a team who are just checking everything that's going on the page. So, you know, I've never felt unsafe on a surrogacy Facebook page. I've always felt really protected, and that everyone there is genuine, and you know, never really been afraid of anything going wrong, because I don't know, it's just a really lovely environment to be a part of.
Well, we'll talk about the legalities in a second, but I just want to put it out to the audience that are watching tonight. If you have any questions for Karina, you've seen she'll talk about anything, I think, that you ask. And she's completely open to helping everybody tonight. So please do put your questions in the Q&A function, and we'll get back to those in a little while. But first, I've got to carry on. I've just checked the time. It's quite quite late, and I've only asked 2 questions, and I'm so engrossed. So don't worry if you don't ask anything, but if you do want to, Karina's here. So let's move on to question 3, if that's okay.
Yeah.
What was your experience using a surrogate to have your babies? We know that obviously you had to grieve the loss of not carrying yourself. Yeah. I mean, actually, let's talk about that as well. How did you grieve that loss?
I think it's really important to talk about that, because you can't just turn up at surrogacy and not have gone through that process. Because one thing I say to anyone who's about to join sort of the surrogacy community or looking to have a baby through surrogacy is, have you come to terms with the fact that you cannot do this, and the fact that you have to ask for help? Because yes, there will be points during the surrogacy journey that you might feel envious that your surrogate is doing what you cannot do. But if that turns into jealousy, if those thoughts of jealousy start to creep in, you need to do more work on yourself, because you have to be absolutely at peace with the fact that this person is doing everything that you cannot do and that you want to do. So yeah, for me, you know, I think going through cancer sort of helped me grieve that as well. And because I had illness running alongside infertility, it was almost like, you know, what is more important to you, motherhood or being pregnant? Because being pregnant would risk your life. So it was almost, for me, it was a bit easier to get there, because it was like, save my life and create this life, you know, elsewhere is the best scenario for everyone involved, rather than putting anyone at risk unnecessarily. But definitely, the grieving process of, you know, of conception and all of the romanticizing around pregnancy, like even now, like I write about it a lot. Like I wish I still would wish I could have a pregnancy test and pee on a stick, or like, you know, I still wish I could have a bump that my husband could put his hand on and feel a baby kick, or I could, like, you know, all of my children, I only, out of my 4 children, I only ever felt 1 kick, and that was with my eldest. I didn't feel anything with the triplets. So, you know, that's
surprisingly, because there's 6 legs in there.
Yeah, but it was a pandemic and I couldn't see her.
I see. I thought you physically could not feel them.
No, we were obviously separated.
That's very hard. Very hard.
Really difficult times, and you know, the pandemic was absolutely, you know, it was very difficult for anyone who's naturally or who's pregnant themselves, but for someone who's pregnant via someone else, horrendous. It was horrendous. Like, you know, you don't have your bump and you don't have access to that bump, and it was so detaching that, you know.
What country was she in?
England. She's in England, but obviously,
but you weren't allowed to.
We were locked down, weren't we? So we couldn't travel. She lived in a different city in a town to me. I actually was classed as clinically vulnerable, so it was really isolating. So yeah, we couldn't get close to each other. And then, you know, scans, when you're not allowed, you know, when people are saying that partners aren't allowed to scans, and there was never.
You weren't able to go to the scans.
Well, I eventually got to the 20-week scan.
Oh.
But whoever thought of the woman who's not carrying her own child? No one in consideration.
I remember you writing about this, and I remember thinking, absolutely right. This isn't right. This is terrible. Just horrible times for you. You have literally gone through everything, and you're still here standing and inspiring. Honestly, it's brilliant. But your experience of surrogacy, obviously, this is part of it. And your relationship with a surrogate. Tell us about that.
My experience of surrogacy is wonderful. And, you know, I think that comes from the fact that it was, you know, my first journey where everything was brand new. We took it slow. Like, you know, it was almost a full 12 months from the point at which I started speaking to my surrogate to the day of our transfer. We got to know each other really well, really intimately. You know, I know we'll talk about this in a second, we spent a lot of time going through our agreements. We kept in contact throughout the pregnancy. You know, obviously my firstborn wasn't born in a pandemic, so we could meet up and have lunches and you know, spend time with her. And it was a beautiful journey, and I couldn't have asked for anything more from that pregnancy and from my surrogate. And, you know, it was absolutely wonderful. And with my second surrogate and the second journey we went on, I mean, God, it was, you know, when we found out we were having triplets, that was difficult in terms of the medical teams. But initially, you know, our surrogate was, you have to make sure that everyone wants triplets. She has to be happy to carry triplets. We have to be happy to raise triplets. So initially there was that fear. I mean, she made it very clear that she wanted to carry the, you know, she had no intention of reducing the pregnancy despite what her medical teams were saying. But she was afraid that we wouldn't want to, or wouldn't be able to raise triplets, and we might ask her to reduce the pregnancy. But, you know, again, it was the match was just perfect, and we'd spent so much time getting to know each other that we actually, there was no question that anyone didn't want all three babies, you know. And we obviously all agreed as a team that yes, you know, if she's happy to carry them, we absolutely want them in our family, and that was our choice. And so we had to, you know, Laura had to actually ultimately look for a new medical team, because the consultant she was under kept telling her to reduce and kept reminding her of the risk, and she just didn't want that. So she found a team that was supportive. So yeah, I mean, and then the pregnancy, obviously it was very difficult in a pandemic, but she kept in touch with us as much as she could. And, you know, almost every week she would send me the sounds of the heartbeats for the babies, and I would record my voice on audio and send it to her babies. And, you know, we did whatever we could to be as close as we could. And we had the 20-week scan, and that's where I talk about this envy, because actually I didn't feel it so much with Amala, because I felt more involved in the pregnancy with the triplets, because I was less involved. I sort of turned up at this scan at 20 weeks and she knew everything about my babies. I mean, there's 3 of them, and like, you know, there's heads and legs and everything everywhere. And I felt a bit like, you know, the episode of Friends when Jennifer Aniston's looking at the screen and just Rachel's saying, oh, I can't see anything, like, because she couldn't interpret on this screen. And I was almost looking at the screen, you know, Laura's there going, oh, look, there's a head, there's a leg, and I'm looking at it going, I haven't got
you're so detached.
You're so detached. And you know, and it's always the case that the sonographer sort of pays more attention to the woman who's carrying than sharing that information with the woman sitting next to her.
You felt like the man.
Yeah, like a real outsider, actually.
Yeah, men always say they feel quite detached in infertility and in these circumstances.
Yeah, but almost more so because you don't go home with that bump.
Yeah.
It's another level of detachment, because the man, at least the woman might be with him and he might feel a kick at home, or he might watch that bump grow over the weeks. But for me, it was like, I saw no tummy too. I went there and there was this, you know, Laura was massive because she was pregnant. So I was like, oh my God, like, you know, that's progressed so quickly. And then to the scan where you're like, oh God, you know, I couldn't identify parts. And I just thought, oh, it just makes it, you know, it's no one's fault, but it's just a reminder of everything you've not been able to do.
Yeah.
Hurts, and it will continue to hurt. And, you know, I say this all the time, that people look at my family thinking, oh my God, look at it, it's wonderful, and she's got these 4 kids, and like, she deserves it, and it's beautiful. But the trauma doesn't leave you, and the grief doesn't leave you. You just grow around it, you know.
I think that's what they say about every fertility journey, don't they? Obviously some are more extreme than others, but, you know, you never get over it. Doesn't matter if you end up pregnant or you don't have children, or you have all the children. You know, you went through a trauma over those times, and then a lot of PTSD must kick in at points as well. And but look,
to answer the question, you know, my relationship with my son is brilliant. You know, I love them. I still have them in my lives, and my children know they're born through surrogacy. So my daughter's 3 now, and she's starting to understand. And she always says, "Oh, we'll read her books about, you know, surrogacy," and she'll go, she'll look at the pictures, and she'll go, "Oh, that's like my brother's in Laura's tummy, and Amala was in Ina's tummy, and then I came home to mummy and daddy." Like, they're very aware of how they came to be, and I'm very.
Are you still in touch with the surrogates?
Yeah, and I will be for the rest of their lives. Like, that's my intention. You know, they're a very important part of how my children came to be, and I want my children to explore that relationship when it's right for them to.
And when will you start telling your sons that they were donor conceived?
Pretty much the same as I did with Amali. You know, as soon as they're starting to sort of understand, and we're going to, you know, we'll have children's books and stuff, and I will be open from day one, really. From, you know, tell them now, they wouldn't understand it, but they'll, you know, they'll grow up in an environment where it's a very normal conversation. Yeah,
brilliant. Question 4 from me, and remember, you can ask Karina some questions if you want, pop them in the Q&A box. How much does this all cost? Because I know we don't pay our surrogates in the UK, but what agreement did you come to, or did you come to any agreement?
You pay you pay your surrogate expenses. So it's not that it's free, and it's definitely not free, but your surrogate will come to you with her sort of predetermined expenses that she thinks the cost she will incur as a result of being pregnant, and that will cover all sorts of things like time that she has to take off for work, for various appointments or scans, extra help she may need at home because she's heavily pregnant and can't do her normal stuff, or childcare, or whatever else. And some surrogates will put in, sort of make sure there are days out for her kids because she's not spending as much time with them as she normally would. So a surrogate will come to her expenses in whatever way she comes to them. As an intended parent, you don't get the breakdown, so you will just get given a round number of this is my expenses, and you sort of like it or lump it kind of thing. And that, I think in the UK, the average is between sort of £15,000 to £25,000 for surrogacy expenses, dependent on, your surrogate circumstances. So that's what you're looking to pay for expenses.
Right.
But you have to remember that on top of that, you've got your regular IVF costs, you've got your clinic costs, you've got your transfer costs, you've got everything else. So it's not, it's definitely not
a cheap version option.
It's definitely something that you have to have worked out where you're going to find the money from before you go on that journey.
Yeah, and that always feels so unfair to me.
It is.
That's the part that gets me.
It's really expensive, and it's not cheap, but then it's not incredibly expensive when you look at other commercialized surrogacy arrangements like those in the US. So, unfortunately, it is what it is. You can't ask someone to carry your child for free because that's not fair on anyone. And so if someone's telling you what their expenses are, you almost have no choice but to pay those expenses. And, I have to say that, we're not massively affluent, but we had savings, and we saved hard, and I would pay all of that all over again for my children.
Of course.
It is expensive, and for us, the donor conception, so the known egg donation, was a really expensive element, and then having treatment overseas made it super pricey as well. So not cheap.
Really. So you have to pay for the liberty to be able to see the donor, meet the donor.
Pay for that, yeah.
It's like an added extra.
Yeah.
Gosh. But that was important, and that's what you decided. Well, look, amazing. I didn't even know that existed. See, I learned something new every day. Question 5 from me is about the legal surroundings. So what are the legalities around UK surrogacy for a start? Let's start there. Because I just wouldn't know where to start with it. I know that you're not immediately named as the parent. So I know that because I saw that you had very recently been given the court judgment, which is brilliant. But I know that. Yeah. That's about all I know. So, so how does it work?
Surrogacy, it's regulated in the UK. There aren't, a lawyer would be able to articulate this far better than I do, but there isn't a legal framework that you work within. So it's not like there's a contract you can draw up and you hold your surrogate to that contract. That doesn't happen. So what you do is you create an agreement. An agreement is almost what a contract would look like if it was legally enforceable. So you talk about, what expenses you're going to pay your surrogate, what frequency those expenses will come at, what you would do if things start to go wrong, what do you do? So if there's a miscarriage, what do you pay, and how do you consider the rest of your journey? If there's a failed transfer, how many times will you continue to try to transfer? If there's a stillbirth, what are the consequences of that? To the point of you talk about if your intended parents were to die on, say Sati and I took a flight somewhere and that plane came down, but there's someone pregnant with my child, what happens to that child?
Yeah.
So your agreement details out everything that would happen in all of these eventualities, but it's not legally binding. It's almost like, you step into it in good faith, knowing that this is what the two parties plan to adhere to, but there's no law to protect the contents of that agreement. So in the eyes of the law, the child that is born is the child of the surrogate. So when that child is born, they on a birth certificate, the surrogate mother will go down as the mum, and if she's unmarried, then one of the intended parents can go as a second parent, but if she's married, her partner has to go on it. So you don't have any legal stances.
That's surely being looked into, right?
It is. There are reforms. Underway at the moment that are due to report back next year, and that is a key change that we expect to see, that intended parents will be recognised as legal parents from the moment the child is born. But as it stands, you don't go on the birth certificate. So for the triplets, like you say, last month we got the parental order granted. So
was your husband on the birth certificate?
He was on. So for the triplets, even if I wanted to, I couldn't have gone on because I wasn't genetically related to the boys. So I couldn't have gone on as a second parent. But with Amala, my first daughter, because she was my genetics, we could have had the surrogate as intended parent. The surrogate would be parent number 1, and I could have gone down as parent number 2, but he took that glory for whatever reason. So I wasn't ever the mum for any of my children from day one legally. But our babies came home with us straight from the hospital. There was nothing. Practically, there was nothing to say they weren't my children. They were absolutely sort of under our care from the minute they were born. But then so the birth certificate is in the name of the surrogate, and you then have to apply to the courts for a parental order, and you can do that from sort of immediately up until you have to do it before the babies are 6 months old to be able to sort of get this parental order granted. So you fill in a load of paperwork, send it off to the family courts. They review everything, review the agreement, sometimes review the sort of expenses that have been paid, and just make sure the arrangement is not commercial. And then and make sure that no one's been sort of forced to carry this child, and make sure that everyone's happy for this order to be granted. So we got assessed by CAFCAS, which is sort of a court's children's services function, and so they came and chatted to us, and then they chatted to my surrogates, and they assessed that everyone's happy that this was always meant to be the way. And then you go to the courts, and the courts generally love to hear surrogacy cases because they see so much hardship in the child welfare space, that when they see a case where parents just want their child, there's no question about it, there's just so much love here, they sort of they looked at our agreement and they're absolutely happy that everything was in order, and granted us the parental order for the boys last month. And for Amala, obviously she was granted, I think she was about 8 months old when her order was granted. So that's how it works. So right now I'm legally mother to all 4 children, thankfully.
Well, thank goodness. Yeah, but you were always their mother, really.
Yeah.
But you mentioned, obviously, I've never heard again of surrogates being found on Facebook.
Yeah.
Does that add a different element again with the legality? Like, so is it a case that if you go through a agent, they sign a paperwork thing to say that they'll definitely give the baby, and then on Facebook it's just a trust thing, or is it all just trust? All of it's just trust?
No, it's all based on trust at the moment. Yeah.
Wow. That must be, did that make you scared at any point? Was that
at no point at all. I mean, people think that you'd be really afraid, but actually when you go into these relationships and you get to know the person so well, and that's why I always say you have to make sure you know this person, and it's not just about knowing that person, it's about knowing their family almost, because that's how you gauge who you gauge that person, by knowing who their family are. And I know for me, I actually ended up knowing some of the friends of my surrogates, and that gave me real confidence that this was the right thing to do, and there was no sort of malice anywhere. This was absolutely a pure altruistic arrangement. So it's about it's just about making sure you have a strong, solid relationship. And I'm not even going to lie, I Facebook stalked my surrogates. When I realized I quite liked them, I was like, oh, who does she know that I might know?
Yeah.
Just to put your own mind at rest that this is right for you, and it's a massive decision. And I think there's some of the surrogacy communities do say, I would find it weird if you didn't ask me if I was their friend, or you didn't ask around about that person, because it's a massive decision you're taking on, and you've got to make sure this is the right person for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, what a story. I can't believe that story. I'm going to bring Laura from the show in briefly just to say hello to you. Laura, what a story tonight. What do you say to this?
Oh my gosh, it's just a roller coaster and amazing story. You are remarkable.
Incredible.
And whilst you've been on, I've been watching you, I've been on your Instagram and looked at your beautiful children and your family, and You are just so remarkable, and you must come back and talk to Sophie and I soon. And
we'd love that. We would love that. Do we have any surrogacy questions? And the thing is, I know it's a niche webinar tonight, so I wouldn't be surprised. What Laura, is anyone
No, we haven't got any questions, but I think to be honest, it's because it's been so enthralling, and that you have literally covered every aspect so brilliantly.
Yeah, there isn't. And also, I think I've always thought that surrogacy, while we've always said this, haven't we, Laura, at the show, that it's something very small, minute amount, percentage of people that do it, but it's such a needed thing as well. You know, it's such an important topic.
So I host a podcast. It's called The Intended Parent, which I think your question was, how do you do it? If you listen to that podcast, it's basically a user guide to surrogacy. So
brilliant.
So much more than we can cover on here, but honestly, it's called The Intended Parent. It's on all platforms, and if you just go, it will tell you step by step how you go through a surrogacy process. But what we talk about there quite often is that sometimes people don't think they want to use surrogacy, and they'll go through round and round and round of failed IVF, and actually maybe people could think about it a little bit earlier in their sort of infertility journey, and the cost of surrogacy would actually probably be outweighed by 3 or 4 failed rounds of IVF. So I think it's probably something that we'll find over time does grow. I mean,
happens more often.
We're finding in the community like that actually the number of births through surrogacy is really on rising year on year, and I think
that's brilliant.
More people coming to surrogacy as a route to parenthood, because when you go over and over with IVF and it doesn't work, it might be a viable route for you.
I do think that once the legality thing, like if that's ironed out, I think that would be a really good, I think it would be what scares women. Why am I not on that birth certificate, and why are you not? Why are you not? You created that life, just like you would have created that life if you'd done IVF with any, donor egg and donor sperm together. You would have created that life. You would become the parent if you carried it. So, let's hope that news comes next year.
There's an element, I guess, of protecting the surrogate and her mental health and her well-being. And I think maybe they're just trying to find a way of balancing, protecting both the intended parents and the surrogates. And hopefully when those reforms come back, there's a magic solution that keeps everyone happy. And
let's hope. I know the comments just come in, Laura, if you want to give that to Karina.
Yeah, it's a comment saying it's a really, really helpful and inspiring conversation. Thank you so much.
Lovely.
So I'm sure there's many people, and remember that our webinars get watched and watched again. So everything that you said tonight will, I'm sure, help loads of people. Actually, I should tell you a quick story that I met a mother and daughter at the show in 2018, I think. And the daughter had some cancer treatment and was unable to have her own children. And her mother was with her because her mother was considering being her surrogate. And that
amazing.
was a lovely story. And she was a young, she was in her 60s, but she said, I'm actually, and then, as we know, there is no age limit on a woman carrying a child. So I don't know. I always wonder about that family and whether the mum did go on to become the surrogate.
I love that. And I always want to know a resolution. It's a shame you didn't get a number, Laura. I'd want to know too. We had another comment come in just as that happened. I think it was another, you're very inspiring comment, I think I read just as it popped up. So
thank you, you're really inspiring. I think the same. I think we're all slightly sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, you have such energy and positivity and grace, and you've been through so much. You are a remarkable lady, and you must share your story to help others, because great telly tonight.
Thank
great
you.
telly.
And I think we just had something. Now they're coming. See, now they're coming through. Did somebody else say something just there, Laura? Did I see something pop up?
Jessica Hepburn, who's watching, and she's saying, I agreed, I'm kind of speechless.
We're all speechless. I have one more question, because I'm never speechless. Before we end tonight, and that is really, Karina, what would you say to people out there who are thinking of using a surrogate to have their children, and they're just a little bit anxious about it? What advice would you give them?
I always say look for the stories of hope in every path. I look for the stories that give you the positive outlook on what you're about to do, because the fear will creep in, but you need to find hope. And you know, once you find those stories, you'll realize that this is a really viable route to parenthood. And that's what I did when I first joined the forums. I was looking for everyone who'd had a child through surrogacy, and I was looking for all those good news stories, partly to put in my back pocket to tell my husband how doable this was, but partly because I needed to know that this was a really viable way to go forward for, and to create a family and build up a little bank of stories. Call upon them when you're feeling really fragile and vulnerable, and just think about, is that, you know, that question is, do I want motherhood or do I want pregnancy? And if it's motherhood and you're struggling with the pregnancy element, then surrogacy, you know, provides a really, really viable route to motherhood. And you know, I wouldn't look back, and I've been very blessed to have had 2 beautiful journeys.
I'm just thinking about all the people that use your story as an inspiration to being able to do it. So thank you for that. Thank you for tonight, and thank you for everything. We hope to see you very, very soon. Right, guys, that's blown my mind. I think it's, but actually I can genuinely say that since we started this year, that is the story that's just going to stick with me forever. Final few things before we go. Please follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, where you'll get all the information and be able to sign up for the rest of the fertility shows. Let's All Talk free weekly webinar series, ending in two episodes time. I can't believe that, at the end of July. So do sign up for the next 2. I'll tell you about next week's in a second. Please also download the Peanut app for free and join the fertility show group. That's where you'll find the discount code to buy your fertility show summit ticket, and get all the content from that for a right bargain, to be fair, if you get that downloaded code. Next week at the same time of 8 p.m. next Wednesday, Jessica will be back and talking to Satwinder Sandhu, the CEO of the IAC, that's the Centre for Adoption. They will be discussing how adoption abroad works and the processes behind that. So if you're thinking about overseas adoption as an option for your family, you don't want to miss that. Meanwhile, I will be back in a few weeks' time. Until then, thank you for joining us this evening. It's been wonderful to have you, and Karina. Take care and good night.